Billionaire entered the hospital room, furious, and stopped when he saw his ex-wife with newborn twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now she sit back and enjoy every detail. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 52nd floor, each drop creating temporary rivers down the glass that separated Thorne Whitaker from the city below. At 35, he commanded a logistics empire that moved goods across continents. Yet tonight he couldn't move himself away from the bourbon glass that had become his only companion. Thorne stood 6'3" with broad shoulders that filled his custom-tailored charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was always meticulously styled, not a strand out of place, and his steel-gray eyes held the kind of intensity that made competitors nervous and shareholders confident. Tonight, however, those same eyes reflected something different, a hollowness that expensive whiskey couldn't fill. 7 months. That's how long it had been since Ivy walked out of his life, taking with her the only light that had ever penetrated the fortress he'd built around his heart. The divorce papers sat in his home safe, officially stamped and filed, but the invisible chains around his chest seemed to tighten with each passing day. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. Another late-night business call, no doubt. Thorne had built his reputation on being available 24/7, the man who never slept when deals needed closing. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. "Whitaker?" he answered curtly. "Mr. Whitaker? This is Memorial General Hospital. I'm calling about Ivy Dorn." The glass slipped from his fingers, amber liquid spreading across financial reports that suddenly meant nothing. His heart stopped, then hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. "What happened? She's been admitted. Emergency situation, room 304. Sir, there's no emergency contact listed, but your name was in her wallet as—" Thorne didn't wait for the explanation. He was already grabbing his keys, his mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Car accident, illness, something he should have prevented if he'd been there, if he'd been the man she deserved instead of the emotionally unavailable statue his father had carved him into. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt eternal. His hands shook as he started the engine of his black Porsche 911, the same car Ivy had once called compensating for something. She'd laughed when she said it, her green eyes sparkling with mischief, and he'd pretended to be offended while secretly loving how she never treated him like the untouchable billionaire everyone else saw. Ivy Dorn was everything he wasn't, warm where he was cold, spontaneous where he was calculated, brave enough to feel everything deeply while he'd spent his life running from any emotion that might make him vulnerable. At 30, she had auburn hair that caught sunlight like copper wire, and a smile that could disarm his carefully constructed defenses faster than any competitor ever could. She'd been a marketing consultant working on a project for his company when they met. While other women approached him with dollar signs in their eyes, Ivy had looked right through his wealth and seen the man underneath, a man even he had forgotten existed. She'd challenged his decisions, laughed at his intensity, and somehow made him believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than the cold, profit-driven machine his father Eldrick had raised him to become. But Eldrick Whitaker's voice still echoed in Thorne's head during their relationship. "Emotions are luxuries we can't afford, son. Show weakness, and they'll tear you apart." So even with Ivy, Thorne had held pieces of himself back, kept his walls intact, maintained the distance that felt safer than vulnerability. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty at 2 in the morning. Thorne's footsteps echoed through sterile hallways as he followed signs to the 3rd floor, his mind creating and discarding explanations for why Ivy would be here, why she'd have his name in her wallet when they hadn't spoken since she'd signed those papers and walked away from everything they'd built together. Room 304. The door was partially open, and he could hear the soft beeping of medical equipment. His hand hesitated on the door handle. What if she didn't want to see him? What if— He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ivy was sitting up in the hospital bed, and she was alive. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, he saw something that made the world tilt off its axis. She wasn't alone. In her arms, she held not one, but 2 tiny bundles wrapped in hospital blankets. 2 newborns, their small faces peaceful in sleep, their features delicate and perfect. Thorne's breath caught in his throat. The babies had his nose, his chin, the same dark hair that crowned his own head. There was no mistaking it. These were his children. "Ivy," he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. She looked up at him, and in her green eyes he saw exhaustion, pain, and something else, a strength that hadn't been there before, forged in the fire of whatever she'd endured alone. "Hello, Thorn," she said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. "Meet your children." The room spun around him. Children, plural. Two perfect little humans who shared his DNA, who had been growing inside the woman he loved while he'd been drowning in bourbon and regret. I didn't know," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Something flickered across Ivy's face. Surprise, confusion, then a flash of anger that made her eyes blaze. "What do you mean you didn't know? I left you the pregnancy test results, Thorn. I left them on your desk with a letter explaining everything." Thorn stepped closer, his mind reeling. "What letter? I never received any letter." "Don't lie to me," Ivy said, her voice gaining strength. "Not now. Not after everything. You responded to my email. You told me you didn't want any involvement, that you'd send money but to keep you out of it." The words hit him like physical blows. He'd never received an email from Ivy. He'd never seen any pregnancy test. And he certainly hadn't responded with such callous disregard for the woman who'd meant everything to him. "Ivy, I swear to you, I never got any letter. I never sent any email. If I had known—" "If you had known what?" she interrupted, shifting one of the babies to her other arm with practiced ease. "You'd have married me out of obligation? Pretended to be happy about an unplanned pregnancy?" "No," Thorn said firmly, taking another step closer. "If I had known, I would have been here. For all of it. Every doctor's appointment, every midnight craving, every kick and movement. I would have been here when they were born." Ivy studied his face in the dim light, searching for deception, for the manipulation she'd learned to expect from him. But all she saw was raw honesty and a pain that matched her own. "Someone intercepted your letter," Thorn said slowly, pieces of a horrifying puzzle beginning to fall into place. "Someone responded as me." As the weight of betrayal settled over both of them, one of the babies stirred in Ivy's arms, letting out a soft cry that seemed to echo all the pain and loss of the past 7 months. Who had stolen their chance at happiness? And more importantly, was it too late to get it back? The silence in room 304 was broken only by the gentle breathing of the newborns and the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Thorn stood frozen, watching Ivy cradle their children he'd never known existed until 5 minutes ago. "Tell me about the letter," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every detail." Ivy adjusted the babies in her arms, her movements careful and practiced despite having given birth only hours ago. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her gaze remained steady and determined. "3 days after our divorce was finalized, I found out I was pregnant," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared, confused, but I knew I had to tell you. Whatever had happened between us, you had a right to know." Thorn pulled the visitor's chair closer to her bed, his expensive suit wrinkling as he leaned forward. His steel gray eyes never left her face, drinking in every word like a man dying of thirst. "I went to Whitaker Industries at 7 in the morning. The security guard knew me. Let me up to your floor. I put the envelope on your desk personally, a handwritten letter explaining everything, along with the pregnancy test and the first ultrasound photo." Ivy's voice caught slightly. "There was a yellow sticky note on top. I wrote, 'Please call me when you read this. We need to talk.' Ivy." The details painted a picture that made Thorn's chest tighten with rage and grief. Someone had deliberately stolen this moment from them, had orchestrated their separation with surgical precision. "2 days later, I got an email from your business account," Ivy continued, her green eyes hardening. "It was cold, dismissive. It said you wanted nothing to do with the pregnancy, that you'd arrange for financial support but didn't want personal involvement. It said our marriage had been a mistake and this just proved we were better off apart." Each word was a knife twisting in Thorn's gut. He could picture the email perfectly. It sounded exactly like something his father would write, the kind of calculated cruelty Eldrick Whitaker wielded like a surgical instrument. "That wasn't me," Thorn said, his hands clenching into fists. "Ivy, I swear on my life that wasn't me." "I know," she said softly, and the admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. "I can see it in your eyes. The man who wrote that email, that wasn't the man who used to hold me during thunderstorms because he knew they reminded me of the night my parents died." The mention of their intimate moments, the way he'd learned to read her fears and comfort them, made Thorn's throat constrict. He'd forgotten how well she'd known him, how she'd seen past his armor to the man underneath. "Your father," Ivy said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. Thorne nodded grimly. "It has to be. He's the only one with access to my office, my email, my entire life. He's been controlling every aspect of my existence since I was old enough to walk." One of the babies stirred, and Ivy instinctively began a gentle rocking motion. Thorne watched, mesmerized by her natural grace with their children she'd carried and delivered completely alone. "What are their names?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I haven't named them yet," Ivy admitted. "I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for this moment, as impossible as it seemed." Thorne studied the tiny faces of his son and daughter, for he could somehow sense which was which, even wrapped in identical blankets. The boy had his strong jawline, while the girl had inherited Ivy's delicate features but his dark coloring. "How was the pregnancy?" he asked. "Were you alone the entire time?" Ivy's composure cracked slightly. "Completely alone. I moved back to my apartment downtown, kept working as much as I could. The morning sickness was brutal for the first 4 months. I lost 12 pounds before I started gaining." The image of Ivy suffering alone, working to support herself while carrying his children, made Thorne want to put his fist through the hospital wall. Instead, he reached out slowly, carefully, until his fingers barely brushed the blanket covering his daughter. "I would have been there," he said fiercely. "For every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night, every moment of pain or fear. You should never have gone through this alone." "I know that now," Ivy said, her voice breaking slightly. "But for 7 months I believed you'd abandoned us. I believed the man I loved had looked at the news of his children and felt nothing but inconvenience." The babies began to fuss, soft, mewling sounds that seemed to pierce straight through to Thorne's soul. Ivy shifted them expertly, but he could see exhaustion pulling at her features. "When did you deliver?" he asked. 6 hours ago. Emergency C-section. They came 5 weeks early. The doctors say they're healthy, but they'll need to stay in the NICU for observation." 6 hours. He'd been sitting in his office drowning in whiskey while she'd been bringing their children into the world, scared and alone. The guilt was overwhelming. "The nurse who called me," Thorne said slowly. "How did they get my number?" "I listed you as the emergency contact when I was admitted. Even after everything, even believing you didn't want us." Ivy looked down at the babies. "I couldn't bring myself to remove your name completely. Maybe some part of me hoped." She didn't finish the sentence, but Thorne understood. Hope was a dangerous thing when you'd been hurt as deeply as they'd hurt each other. Or rather, as his father had hurt them both. A soft knock interrupted the moment. A nurse peered around the door, her expression kind but professional. "Mrs. Dorn, it's time to move the babies to the NICU for their overnight monitoring. Don't worry, it's just precautionary." As the nurse gently took the twins, Thorne felt a desperate urge to follow, to stand guard over these tiny humans who'd already survived so much. But he stayed, sensing that Ivy needed him here more. When they were alone, the weight of everything unsaid pressed down on them like a physical force. "I need to confront him," Thorne said, his voice deadly quiet. "My father, he stole 7 months from us, Ivy. 7 months of your pregnancy, the chance to prepare together, the opportunity to be there when they were born." "And then what?" Ivy asked, exhaustion making her words slur slightly. "You expose him, he admits it, and we all live happily ever after." "It's not that simple, Thorne. The damage is done. I've spent 7 months learning to be strong without you. I've built a life that doesn't include you." The words hit their mark, but Thorne heard something underneath them. A challenge, maybe even a plea. She was testing him, seeing if he'd fight for them or walk away when things got complicated. "Then I'll spend however long it takes earning my way back," he said simply. "I'll prove that the man you fell in love with is still here. Underneath all the ice my father froze around my heart." Ivy studied his face in the dim hospital lighting, searching for the boy who'd once confessed that he'd never felt truly loved until he met her. The man who'd held her hand during her father's funeral, and never said a word, just been present. "Your father won't let you go easily," she warned. "You know that, right? Confronting him means war." Thorne stood, his full height and presence filling the small room. For the first time in months, he felt clarity instead of the crushing weight of emptiness. "Good," he said, his steel-gray eyes blazing with purpose. "It's about time I stopped being his son and started being their father." As he leaned down to kiss Ivy's forehead, a gesture so gentle and familiar it made her breath catch, neither of them noticed the figure in expensive shoes walking quickly past the doorway. having heard enough to know that 7 months of careful manipulation was about to unravel. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan as Thorne's Porsche pulled into the executive parking garage beneath Whitaker Industries. He hadn't slept, hadn't even considered going home after leaving the hospital. The rage burning in his chest demanded immediate action, and he knew exactly where to find the man who'd stolen 7 months of his life. Eldrick Whitaker always arrived at the office before sunrise, a habit he'd drilled into Thorne since childhood. Success doesn't sleep, he'd say, usually while criticizing Thorne for some perceived weakness. Today, that predictability would be his downfall. The elevator ride to the 63rd floor felt like ascending to a battlefield. Thorne studied his reflection in the polished steel doors. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loose, his expensive shirt wrinkled from hours at Ivy's bedside. He looked like a man who'd been through hell, which was exactly what he was. The executive floor was empty except for the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic far below. Thorne's footsteps echoed on marble as he walked past his own corner office toward the imposing double doors at the end of the hall. The nameplate read, Eldrick Whitaker, Chairman and CEO, in gold letters that had intimidated Thorne since he was old enough to read. Not today. He didn't knock. The doors burst open with enough force to rattle the crystal awards lining Eldrick's walls. Eldrick Whitaker sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a silver-haired lion of 62 who'd built an empire through ruthless calculation and emotional detachment. He was impeccably dressed even at this early hour, his navy suit pressed to perfection, his steel blue eyes, so similar to Thorne's, betraying no surprise at his son's dramatic entrance. "You look terrible," Eldrick said calmly, not looking up from the financial reports spread before him. "I trust whatever kept you out all night was worth jeopardizing the Carmichael meeting this afternoon." "Where is it?" Thorne's voice was deadly quiet. "Where is what?" Eldrick's tone remained infuriatingly casual as he made notes in the margins of a contract. "The letter, the pregnancy test, the ultrasound photo that Ivy left on my desk 7 months ago." Eldrick's pen stopped moving. For the first time since Thorne had burst through the doors, his father looked up, and in his eyes was the cold calculation of a predator evaluating his prey. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't." Thorne slammed his palms on the desk, leaning forward until he was inches from his father's face. "Don't lie to me. Not about this. I know you intercepted her letter. I know you responded to her email pretending to be me." Eldrick leaned back in his leather chair, his expression shifting from feigned confusion to mild annoyance, as if Thorne were a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "Even if I had done such a thing, which I'm not admitting, it would have been in your best interest. That woman was a distraction, Thorne. She made you weak, emotional, unfocused. The divorce was the best thing that could have happened to your career." The casual dismissal of Ivy as that woman made Thorne's vision blur with rage. "She was pregnant. With twins. Your grandchildren. Alleged grandchildren," Eldrick corrected smoothly. "You have no proof those children are yours. Women like her." Thorne's hand shot across the desk, grabbing his father by the throat. The move was so swift, so uncharacteristically violent, that Eldrick's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Say one more word about her," Thorne whispered, his voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "I dare you." For a moment, father and son stared at each other across decades of manipulation and control. Then Thorne released his grip and stepped back, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Eldrick adjusted his tie with practiced composure, but his breathing was slightly ragged. "Violence, Thorne? How disappointingly common of you. Where is the letter?" Eldrick stood slowly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. His silhouette was backlit by the rising sun, making him appear larger, more imposing, a psychological trick he'd perfected over decades of intimidation. "I burned it," he said simply, along with the sentimental photograph and the little plastic stick she left. Such melodramatic props, really. The confession hit Thorne like a physical blow. Even though he'd known the truth, hearing it confirmed felt like watching his father murder his future all over again. "Why?" The word came out broken, desperate. "Because I've spent 35 years molding you into the perfect successor, and I wasn't about to let some middle-class nobody with daddy issues derail everything we've built." Eldrick turned from the window, his face a mask of cold determination. "The Carmichael merger alone will net us $3 billion. Their daughter Celeste is beautiful, educated from the right family. She understands the importance of strategic partnerships. You mean you arranged a marriage? Thorne said, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. This was never about protecting me from Ivy. This was about controlling who I married, who I had children with, who inherits this empire. Of course it was. Eldrick's admission was delivered without shame or regret. Do you think I built Whitaker Industries so you could throw it away on romantic fairy tales? Marriage is a business transaction, son. Love is a luxury we can't afford. The words echoed conversations they'd had throughout Thorne's childhood, but now they sounded hollow, poisonous. How many decisions had his father made for him over the years? How many opportunities for genuine connection had been eliminated before Thorne even knew they existed? I have grandchildren, Thorne said quietly. 2 babies who were born last night while I sat in this building, completely unaware they existed. You have obligations, Eldrick countered, to this company, to our shareholders, to the legacy I've built. Those children, if they're even yours, will be provided for. Set up trust funds, pay for their education, whatever keeps them quiet, but they can't be allowed to interfere with your real responsibilities. The casual way his father discussed his newborn children like business expenses broke something fundamental inside Thorne. All his life, he'd sought Eldrick's approval, tried to live up to impossible standards, allowed himself to be shaped into a man who prioritized profit over people. I'm done, Thorne said, his voice steady for the first time since entering the office. Done with what? With you? With this company? With being your trained puppet? Thorne straightened to his full height, and for the first time in his life he felt taller than his father. I'm selling my shares. Eldrick's composure finally cracked. You can't be serious. This company is your birthright, your identity. Without it, you're nothing. Without it, I'm free to become the father my children deserve and the man Ivy fell in love with before you spent years convincing me that emotions were weaknesses. She won't take you back, Eldrick said, desperation creeping into his voice. Too much damage has been done. She'll never trust you again. Maybe not, Thorne admitted, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn that trust back. And if I fail, at least I'll fail as myself, not as the man you tried to make me. He turned toward the door, but Eldrick's voice stopped him. If you walk out that door, if you sell those shares, I'll destroy her. The woman, the children, everything she's built. I'll make sure she never works in this city again. Thorne spun around, and the look in his eyes made Eldrick take an involuntary step backward. If you come anywhere near my family, Thorne said, his voice carrying a lethal edge Eldrick had never heard before, I'll do more than grab your throat. I'll expose every illegal deal, every bribed official, every dirty secret you've hidden in the name of building this empire, and then I'll watch it all burn. The threat hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. 35 years of father-son dynamics had just shifted irrevocably, and both men knew there would be no going back. Thorne walked toward the door, each step feeling like shedding chains he'd worn so long he'd forgotten they were there. You'll regret this, Eldrick called after him. When you're living in some mediocre suburb struggling to support a ready-made family, when the excitement wears off and reality sets in, you'll come crawling back. Thorne paused at the threshold, his hand on the door handle. The only thing I regret, he said without turning around, is that it took me 35 years to realize that the most successful thing I could ever do is be nothing like you. As the doors closed behind him, Thorne felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of choosing his own path. Now he just had to prove to Ivy, and to himself, that he was brave enough to walk it. The NICU at Memorial General was a stark contrast to the corporate battleground Thorne had just left. Soft lighting, hushed voices, and the gentle rhythm of machines monitoring tiny lives created an atmosphere of fragile hope. Through the observation window, he could see his children in their incubators, 2 perfect beings who had no idea their father had just burned down his entire world for them. Ivy stood beside the isolettes, her auburn hair catching the morning light filtering through the windows. She'd changed from her hospital gown into her own clothes, dark jeans and a soft cream sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable. When she heard his footsteps, she turned, and he saw that she'd been crying. The doctors say they're doing well, she said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. Their lungs are strong for 35 weekers. They should be able to go home in about 2 weeks. Home. The word hung between them, loaded with questions neither was ready to ask. Who's home? Together or separately? How did you rebuild a family when the foundation had been destroyed by lies? I confronted him, Thorne said, moving to stand beside her. Through the glass, he watched his daughter's tiny chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. My father. He admitted everything. Ivy's reflection in the window went very still. And? He burned your letter. The pregnancy test. The ultrasound photo. Everything. He said it was in my best interest that you were a distraction from my real responsibilities. Thorne's voice carried the bitter taste of betrayal. He's been planning to marry me off to some business partner's daughter. The whole thing was orchestrated. Celeste Carmichael, Ivy said softly. Thorne looked at her sharply. How do you— It was in the society pages 3 months ago. Whitaker Air spotted with shipping heiress at charity gala. There was a photo of you two dancing. Ivy's voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her profile. She's beautiful, blonde, elegant, born into your world. Everything I'm not. The image came back to him. A required appearance at one of his father's networking events, dancing with a woman whose conversation never strayed from stock portfolios and family pedigrees. He'd felt nothing, thought nothing beyond getting through the evening so he could go home and drink until Ivy's absence stopped feeling like a physical ache. I felt nothing for her, he said. Less than nothing. I spent the entire evening wishing I was anywhere else. But you went. You played the part. Ivy finally looked at him, and her green eyes held a sadness that cut deeper than anger. How many other parts have you played, Thorne? How many other decisions has your father made for you? The question forced him to examine 35 years of choices that hadn't really been choices at all. His college major, his career path, the charities he supported, even the restaurants he frequented. How much of his life had been his own? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe none of them. Maybe that's why I was so afraid to let you all the way in. I wasn't sure there was actually a me underneath all his programming. A nurse approached them with the practiced quiet of someone accustomed to emotional conversations in sacred spaces. Mrs. Dorn, the babies are ready for their feeding. Would you like to try nursing again? Ivy nodded, and Thorne watched as she was led to a rocking chair positioned between the two incubators. The process was awkward, clearly painful, but she persevered with the determined grace that had first attracted him to her. Here was a woman who didn't give up, who fought for what mattered. You can touch them, the nurse said to Thorne, noticing his hesitation. Skin contact is important for premature babies. It helps regulate their temperature and heart rate. With trembling hands, Thorne reached through the porthole of his son's incubator. The baby's skin was impossibly soft, warm, alive. When Thorne's finger brushed his tiny palm, the infant's fingers curled around it with surprising strength. The grip of his son's hand triggered something primal in Thorne's chest, a fierce protectiveness he'd never experienced, a love so immediate and overwhelming it made his knees weak. This was his child, his blood, his responsibility, not his father's legacy or his company's future. His. What do you want to name them? He asked Ivy, his voice thick with emotion. She looked down at the baby girl latched to her breast, then over at the son who was holding Thorne's finger like a lifeline. I thought, maybe you should have a say in that, she said carefully. If you want to. I want to be involved in everything, Thorne said immediately. Their names, their first words, their first steps, everything I already missed and everything still to come. If you'll let me. It's not that simple, Thorne. Ivy shifted the baby to her other breast, the movement practiced despite being a new mother. You say you want to be involved, but what does that actually look like? Are you going to show up for 2 a.m. feedings, diaper changes, doctor's appointments that conflict with board meetings? There won't be any more board meetings. I'm selling my shares in Whitaker Industries. The words came out before he'd fully processed the decision, but as soon as he said them, he knew they were true. The conversation with his father had clarified something he'd been avoiding for months. He couldn't be the man his children needed while still being the son his father demanded. Ivy stared at him in shock. You're what? I'm done with my father's company, with his manipulation, with letting him control my life. I want to build something of my own, something clean. Thorne watched his son's fingers tighten around his own. Maybe something smaller, more personal. I have enough money saved to start over, to do things my way. And what about your father? He's not going to just let you walk away. He threatened to destroy you if I left, Thorne admitted. He said he'd make sure you never worked in this city again, that he'd come after you and the children. Fear flashed across Ivy's face before she could hide it. And you think selling your shares will stop him? I think it will give me enough ammunition to stop him permanently. I know where all the bodies are buried, Ivy. Every questionable deal, every bribed official, every corner he's cut to build his empire. If he comes after our family, I'll bring it all down. Our family. The words slipped out naturally, but they hung in the air like a question mark. Ivy caught them, turned them over in her mind. Our family, she repeated slowly. Is that what you think this is? Thorne felt the ground shift beneath him. He'd been so focused on proving his commitment, on showing he was different from the man who'd sent that cold email, that he'd assumed reconciliation was possible. But looking at Ivy now, strong, independent, changed by 7 months of building a life without him, he realized how presumptuous that was. I don't know, he said honestly. I know I love you. I know I want to be their father, want to be part of their lives every single day. But I also know I hurt you in ways that go deeper than my father's manipulation. Ivy was quiet for a long moment, focused on the baby in her arms. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You want to know what the hardest part was? It wasn't the morning sickness or the exhaustion or even the loneliness. It was lying awake at night, feeling them move inside me, and knowing that even if you had wanted us, I wasn't sure you were capable of the kind of love they deserved. The words hit him like a physical blow, but he forced himself to listen to really hear what she was saying. You held yourself back from me even when we were married, Thorne. You gave me pieces of yourself, but never the whole thing. Never the messy, imperfect, completely vulnerable parts that real love requires. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. How do I trust that you've changed? How do I believe that breaking with your father has somehow fixed what was broken between us? It was a fair question, maybe the only question that mattered. Thorne looked at his children, his daughter sleeping peacefully in Ivy's arms, his son still gripping his finger with remarkable determination, and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like armor. I don't know if I can convince you, he said quietly, but I'm willing to spend however long it takes trying, not to win you back, but to become the man you and they deserve, whether we're together or not. The admission surprised them both. It wasn't a declaration of love or a demand for forgiveness. It was something rarer and more valuable. It was the beginning of accountability. I need time, Ivy said finally, and space, to figure out who I am as a mother, as a woman who survived the worst heartbreak of her life and came out stronger. Of course, Thorne said, though every instinct screamed against walking away from them again. But I want to be involved with the children. I want to support you, help with expenses, be there for appointments. As a co-parent, Ivy clarified. Not as my ex-husband trying to work his way back into my bed. The boundaries were clear, painful, but necessary. Thorne nodded, understanding that earning his way back into their lives would require proving himself as a father first, a man second. There's something else, Ivy said, hesitating. The hospital bills, the NICU costs. My insurance covers most of it, but there will be gaps. I was going to figure it out somehow, but I'll handle all of it, Thorne said immediately. Hospital bills, ongoing care, whatever they need. It's the least I can do. I don't want your money out of guilt. It's not guilt. It's responsibility. They're my children too, and I should have been here from the beginning to shoulder these burdens with you. As if summoned by their conversation about the future, the hospital social worker appeared at the NICU entrance, clipboard in hand, and the efficient smile of someone who'd had this conversation hundreds of times. Mrs. Dorn, I need to discuss discharge planning and get some information about the baby's living arrangements. The reality of their situation crystallized. In 2 weeks, Ivy would take their children home, to her apartment, to the life she'd built without him. He would be a visitor in their world, fighting for every moment, every memory, every chance to prove he was worthy of their love. But as his son's grip tightened around his finger once more, Thorne felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 months. Hope. Not for easy reconciliation or fairy tale endings, but for the harder, more valuable prize of earning his place in their lives one day at a time. The real work was just beginning. 3 days had passed since Thorne's confrontation with his father, and the NICU had become his second home. He arrived each morning with coffee for Ivy and fresh flowers that she politely accepted but never commented on. They'd fallen into a careful routine. He held the babies while she pumped milk. She rested while he read business reports aloud in a soft voice that seemed to soothe their son. It was a delicate dance of co-parenting without intimacy, of shared purpose without shared trust. Ivy was changing their daughter's impossibly tiny diaper when the sound of expensive heels clicking against hospital linoleum announced an unwelcome visitor. Through the NICU's glass doors, Thorne spotted a familiar silhouette that made his blood run cold. Celeste Carmichael. She was exactly as the society pages described her. Tall, blonde, elegant in the way that only came from generations of good breeding and better money. Her navy Chanel suit was perfectly tailored. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the fluorescent lights, and her smile was the polished perfection of someone who'd never heard the word no. "Thorne, darling," she said, sweeping into the NICU with the confidence of someone accustomed to being welcome everywhere. "I've been looking for you everywhere. You missed our lunch yesterday, and your father is beside himself with worry." Ivy's hand stilled on the baby's diaper. She didn't look up, but Thorne could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened at the casual intimacy in Celeste's voice. "Celeste," Thorne said carefully, moving to position himself between her and the babies. "What are you doing here?" "Well, when you disappeared for 3 days without a word, I naturally assumed something terrible had happened." Her blue eyes swept the NICU with barely concealed distaste. "Though I never imagined I'd find you here." The way she said "here" made it clear that a hospital NICU was several social strata below her usual haunts. Her gaze landed on Ivy, who was now lifting their daughter with protective care, and something calculating flickered across Celeste's perfect features. "And you must be the mother," she said with the kind of smile that sharks wore before they struck. "How quaint. Thorne has such a soft spot for charity cases." The insult was delivered with such practiced sweetness that it took a moment for the poison to register. Ivy's green eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Thorne stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "You need to leave. Now." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Celeste laughed, the sound like crystal breaking. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because your father is concerned about some very poor decisions you've apparently been making." She reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a thick manila envelope, which she held out to Thorne with manicured fingers. "He asked me to give you this. It's the Carmichael merger proposal, finalized and ready for your signature. Once this goes through, we'll be announcing our engagement at the Metropolitan Club's autumn gala." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Ivy looked up sharply, her face going pale, while Thorne stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. "My engagement?" he repeated slowly. "Our engagement," Celeste corrected with another of her practiced smiles. "Really, Thorne, don't look so shocked. We've been building toward this for months. The merger alone will add $3 billion to your family's portfolio, and our children will inherit the most powerful shipping empire in the Atlantic." "Our children," Ivy whispered, and the pain in her voice made Thorne's chest feel like it was caving in. "Well, legitimate children," Celeste said with casual cruelty, her gaze flicking toward the babies. "I'm sure arrangements can be made for these little ones. Private schools, trust funds, the sort of thing that keeps them comfortable but out of the way." The casual dismissal of his newborn twins as inconveniences to be managed triggered something volcanic in Thorne's chest. For 35 years he'd been taught to control his emotions, to never let passion override strategy. In that moment, 3 decades of conditioning shattered like glass. "Get out," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "I beg your pardon? Get out." Each word was delivered with increasing volume and menace. "Take your proposal, your merger, and your psychotic fantasy about our engagement and get the hell away from my family." Celeste's composure cracked slightly. "Your family? Thorne, darling, you're clearly having some sort of breakdown. These babies aren't your family. They're a mistake that can be corrected with proper financial planning. Those babies," Thorne said, taking a step closer to her, "are my children, and this woman is the mother of my children. If you say one more word about them, I will make sure your father knows exactly how you've conducted yourself here today." For the first time since her arrival, uncertainty flickered across Celeste's face. The Carmichael shipping fortune depended heavily on reputation and social standing, and a public scandal could damage their carefully cultivated image. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, but her voice had lost some of its authoritative edge. "Your father has invested years in grooming you for this merger. He won't let you throw it away for some temporary infatuation." "My father," Thorne said with a smile that contained no warmth, "no longer has any say in my life or my choices. As of yesterday, I'm selling my shares in Whitaker Industries and starting over." The announcement clearly shocked Celeste more than his emotional outburst had. In their world, walking away from $1 billion inheritance was unthinkable, the kind of self-destructive behavior that required immediate intervention. "You can't be serious," she breathed. "Without Whitaker Industries, you're nothing. You're just another pretty face with good breeding and no real substance." "Maybe," Thorne agreed, But I'd rather be nothing authentic than something manufactured by my father's ambitions. Celeste looked around the NICU with newfound understanding. This wasn't a temporary breakdown or a midlife crisis. This was a complete rejection of everything she represented, everything their families had planned. "This won't end here," she said, her mask of sweetness finally dropping to reveal the steel underneath. "Your father and mine have contracts, agreements, expectations. You can't just walk away from billions of dollars because you've developed feelings for your ex-wife." "Watch me," Thorne said simply. Celeste gathered her composure like armor, smoothing her skirt and adjusting her handbag with deliberate precision. When she looked at Ivy, her smile was pure venom. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she said sweetly. "Men like Thorne don't stay fascinated with the same toy for very long. When the novelty wears off and reality sets in, he'll remember what he gave up for you." She turned on her heel and clicked away, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive perfume and threats. The silence that followed was deafening. Ivy continued tending to their daughter with mechanical precision, but Thorne could see her hands trembling slightly. "Ivy," he began. "Don't," she said quietly. "Just don't. She doesn't speak for me. What she said, what she implied, none of that is how I feel. Isn't it?" Ivy finally looked at him, and her green eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She seemed to know an awful lot about your engagement plans, about lunches you've been having, about months of building toward something. Those weren't dates, they were business meetings. My father arranged them, just like he arranged everything else in my life. I felt nothing for her, Ivy. Less than nothing. But you went," she said, echoing their conversation from 3 days earlier. "You played the part. You let her believe there was something between you." "Because I was a coward," Thorne admitted. "Because it was easier to go through the motions than to fight my father about every detail of my existence, but that's over now." "Is it?" Ivy's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because she seemed pretty confident that this isn't over. That your father and her father have plans that don't include your consent." The truth was, Thorne didn't know how far his father would go to salvage the Carmichael merger. Eldrick had spent decades building toward this alliance, and $3 billion was motivation enough for almost any level of manipulation. "Whatever they try to do, I won't let it affect you or the babies," he said. "I meant what I said about bringing down his empire if he comes after our family." "There it is again," Ivy said with a sad smile. "Our family. You keep saying that like it's already decided, like we're already some kind of unit. Aren't we?" The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. "We're two people who share children," Ivy corrected gently. "That doesn't automatically make us a family. Families require trust, Thorne. They require the absolute certainty that the person you're building a life with will choose you over everything else, every single time. I chose you today. I chose you 3 days ago when I confronted my father. I'm choosing you every morning when I show up here instead of going to the office. You're choosing the babies," Ivy said, "which I'm grateful for, truly. But choosing to be a good father isn't the same as choosing to be a good partner." The distinction hit him like a physical blow. She was right. His commitment to their children was absolute, but his commitment to her remained unproven. How could he demonstrate that his feelings for her weren't just collateral damage from his paternal awakening? Their son chose that moment to wake up fussing, his tiny cries filling the space between them. Ivy moved to comfort him, and Thorne watched as she transformed into someone completely focused on their child's needs, her own emotional turmoil set aside for the greater good. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "I have a meeting with my lawyer about the share transfer, and then I need to start looking for office space for my new company." "What kind of company?" Ivy asked, surprising him with her interest. "Sustainable logistics," he said. "Smaller scale than Whitaker Industries, but focused on ethical practices and environmental responsibility. Everything my father's company isn't." For the first time since Celeste's visit, something like approval flickered across Ivy's face. "That sounds like something you would actually care about." "It is," he realized. "Maybe for the first time in my life I'm building something that reflects who I actually am instead of who I'm supposed to be." As he gathered his things to leave, Thorne caught sight of his reflection in the NICU's observation window. The man looking back at him was tired, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt and yesterday's tie. He looked nothing like the polished billionaire heir who danced with Celeste Carmichael at charity galas. He looked real. "Thorne," Ivy called as he reached the door. "Be careful. If she's right about the contracts and agreements between your families, they're not going to let you walk away quietly." "Let them try to stop me," he said, and meant it. I've spent my whole life being afraid of my father's disapproval. I'm not afraid anymore. But as he walked toward the elevator, Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that Celeste's visit had been more than just a social call. It had been a warning shot, a preview of the war his father was preparing to wage. The question was, how far would Eldrick go to get his son back in line? 2 weeks after their confrontation in the NICU, the babies were finally ready to go home. Thorne stood in Ivy's downtown apartment, holding his daughter while Ivy finished packing the diaper bag, and felt the strange sensation of being both completely necessary and entirely out of place. The apartment was a one-bedroom space on the 4th floor of a converted brownstone, cozy, sunlit, and decorated with the kind of personal touches that made a house feel like a home. Framed photographs of Ivy's parents, books stacked on every available surface, plants thriving on windowsills. It was nothing like his sterile penthouse with its million-dollar views and interior designer perfection. The pediatrician said to watch for any changes in their breathing, Ivy said, going through her mental checklist for the 3rd time. And if their temperature goes above 100.4, we need to call immediately. We, Thorne noted, catching the pronoun. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd gradually shifted from I and you to we when discussing the babies, though the boundaries around their own relationship remained firmly in place. Co-parents say we, Ivy clarified, reading his thoughts with the accuracy that had always unnerved and delighted him. It doesn't mean anything beyond that, but it did mean something. It meant trust was being rebuilt, slowly and carefully, one shared responsibility at a time. The apartment's buzzer rang and Ivy's face immediately tensed. In the 2 weeks since Celeste's hospital visit, they'd both been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Eldrick to make his next move in whatever chess game he was playing. "I'll get it," Thorne said, settling their daughter in her bassinet before walking to the intercom. "Delivery for Ivy Dorn," came the crackly voice through the speaker. Thorne exchanged glances with Ivy. They weren't expecting anything, and after Celeste's threats, unexpected deliveries felt ominous. "I'll go down," he said. The delivery man was waiting in the lobby with an enormous bouquet of white roses, at least 5 dozen, arranged with the kind of extravagant precision that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The card was sealed in a cream envelope with Ms. Dorn written in elegant script. Back in the apartment, Ivy stared at the flowers with obvious suspicion. "Open the card," Thorne said, though he had a sinking feeling about what they'd find. Ivy's face went pale as she read the message aloud. "Congratulations on the arrival of your children. I look forward to meeting them soon. With warm regards, Eldrick Whitaker." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Eldrick knew where Ivy lived, knew about the baby's birth, and was making it clear that he could reach them whenever he chose. "He's testing us," Thorne said, his jaw clenching, "seeing how we'll react." "Testing us for what? To see if I'll run back to him to protect you, or if I'll stand my ground and risk him following through on his threats." Ivy sank into her reading chair, suddenly looking exhausted. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of sleepless nights, feeding schedules, and the constant low-level anxiety of new parenthood. Adding the psychological warfare of Thorne's family into the mix was almost too much to bear. "What does he want?" she asked. "Control. He wants me back under his thumb, married to Celeste, running his company the way he's always planned." Thorne moved to the window, looking down at the street where a black sedan that hadn't been there earlier was now parked. "He thinks if he applies enough pressure, I'll cave. And will you?" The question was asked quietly, but Thorne heard the real fear underneath it. Ivy had spent 7 months believing he'd abandoned her and their children at the first sign of inconvenience. Now she was watching him face the full weight of his father's disapproval and wondering if his newfound resolve would crumble under pressure. "No," he said firmly, "but I need to handle this before it escalates. He's already shown he's willing to involve you and the babies, and I won't let that continue." "What are you going to do?" Before Thorne could answer, his son began crying, the particular wail that meant he was hungry and would not be ignored. Ivy moved to pick him up, and Thorne watched as she settled into the nursing routine they'd practiced in the hospital. "I'm going to give him what he wants," Thorne said. "A meeting, but on my terms, in a neutral location, with witnesses." "That sounds dangerous." "Everything about this situation is dangerous, but hiding won't make him go away, and I won't spend our children's lives looking over our shoulders." Ivy studied his face while their son nursed. "You're different," she said finally. "From the man I married, from the man I divorced. You make decisions now instead of just reacting to situations." Having something worth fighting for changes your perspective, he said simply. The words created a moment of charged silence. Ivy looked away first, focusing intently on the baby in her arms. I should go, Thorne said reluctantly. Set up this meeting. Get my lawyer involved. Start the process of legally protecting you and the children from any future interference. Wait, Ivy said as he gathered his jacket. There's something I need to tell you about the apartment. Thorne paused, sensing this was important. I can't afford to stay here long term, she admitted. Not with 2 babies. Not without going back to work full-time, which I can't do for at least another month. I've been looking at places in Queens, maybe Brooklyn, somewhere cheaper. The idea of Ivy and his children living in some cramped apartment in an outer borough, while he had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, felt fundamentally wrong. Let me help, he said immediately. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's child support. It's me taking care of my responsibilities as their father. Child support, yes, but not a blank check to solve all my problems. I need to be able to take care of myself and them. It was a distinction that mattered to her independence, and Thorne was learning to navigate these conversations carefully. Ivy had spent 7 months proving to herself that she could survive alone. She wasn't going to give up that hard-won autonomy easily. What if we found a compromise, he suggested. A place that's safe and comfortable for the babies, but where you're still paying rent, still maintaining your independence. Such as, there's a building in the village. Family-owned, good security, reasonable rents. I know the owner. She's an older woman who specifically rents to young families. It's not charity, it's just a connection. Ivy considered this carefully. I'd want to see it myself, make my own decision, of course, and pay my own deposit, sign my own lease. Absolutely. And you wouldn't have a key unless I gave you one. I wouldn't want one unless you offered. The negotiation felt like progress, like they were learning to work together as co-parents without trampling on each other's autonomy. Thorne's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. What? Ivy asked. My lawyer. Apparently my father has filed an injunction to prevent me from selling my shares in Whitaker Industries. He's claiming I'm mentally unstable and acting against my own interests. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Eldrick, but it also revealed the depth of his desperation. He was pulling out legal weapons that could damage both their reputations permanently. Can he do that? He can try, but it won't work. I've been documented as mentally competent by multiple physicians, and I have plenty of witnesses to my rational decision-making process. Thorne's smile was grim. What he's really doing is declaring war publicly. No more subtle threats or behind-the-scenes manipulation. This is open conflict. I'm scared, Ivy admitted quietly. Good, Thorne said, surprising her. Being scared means you understand how serious this is, but being scared doesn't mean being helpless. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. We're going to fight this? Unless you'd prefer to handle it alone? He asked gently. Ivy looked down at their son, then over at their daughter sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. 2 tiny humans who depended on the adults in their lives to protect them from threats they couldn't even understand. No, she said finally. We'll handle it together. As co-parents, she added quickly, but without the edge that qualification usually carried. As co-parents, Thorne agreed, as he leaned down to kiss their daughter goodbye, a ritual that had developed naturally over the past 2 weeks. Ivy found herself studying his profile. The sharp cheekbones, the strong jaw, the way his eyes softened completely when he looked at their children. She'd fallen in love with this face once, before life and manipulation and misunderstanding had driven them apart. The question that kept her awake at night was whether the man behind that face had really changed, or if she was just seeing what she wanted to see. Thorne, she called as he reached the door. Yeah? Be careful. Whatever you're planning with your father, he's had 35 years to perfect his methods of control. Don't underestimate him. I won't, he promised, but I won't let him intimidate me anymore either. Not when I have something this important to protect. After he left, Ivy sat in the quiet apartment with their sleeping children and wondered if she was making the right choice by trusting him with their safety. The flowers from Eldrick seemed to watch her from the kitchen counter like white eyes, a reminder that choosing Thorne meant choosing his battles too. But as she looked at their son's face, so like his father's, she realized the choice had been made 7 months ago when she decided to carry these babies to term, despite believing their father had abandoned them. She was already all in. The only question now was whether Thorne would prove worthy of that faith. The Four Seasons restaurant was neutral territory, public enough to prevent any dramatic scenes, prestigious enough to satisfy Eldrick's ego, and familiar enough that Thorne knew every exit and sightline. He arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that gave him a clear view of the entrance while keeping his back to the wall. His lawyer, Miranda Chen, sat across from him reviewing documents. She was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in corporate law and family protection orders, with the kind of reputation that made powerful men think twice before underestimating her. "The injunction is bullshit," she said without preamble, her voice low enough not to carry to neighboring tables. "Your father's claiming you're acting irrationally due to emotional distress, but we have medical records, psychological evaluations, and witness testimony proving your competency. It won't hold up in court, but it will delay the share transfer," Thorne said, watching the entrance, "which gives him time to apply more pressure." "Exactly. This isn't about winning legally. It's about creating chaos in your life until you capitulate." Miranda closed the file folder. "The question is, how far are you willing to let this escalate?" Before Thorne could answer, Eldrick Whitaker entered the restaurant like a monarch arriving at court. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression the studied calm of a man who'd never doubted his own supremacy. But Thorne noticed something new in his father's bearing, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that suggested the past 3 weeks hadn't been as easy for him as he'd pretended. Eldrick approached their table alone, which surprised Thorne. He'd expected an entourage of lawyers and assistants, the usual armor of corporate warfare. "Son," Eldrick said, settling into the chair across from them with practiced grace. "Ms. Chen, thank you for arranging this meeting." "Mr. Whitaker," Miranda replied coolly, "I trust you received our response to your injunction filing. A masterfully written document," Eldrick acknowledged, "though ultimately irrelevant. This isn't about legal maneuvering, it's about family." "Family," Thorne repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what you call intercepting private correspondence and responding to emails under false pretenses? I call it protecting my son from making decisions that would destroy everything we've built together." Eldrick's voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "You're angry. I understand that. You feel betrayed. But your emotional reaction doesn't change the facts." "Which facts are those?" "That you're throwing away a $3 billion merger over a woman who trapped you with pregnancy." Eldrick leaned forward slightly. "That you're selling shares worth hundreds of millions to fund some idealistic fantasy about ethical business practices. That you're letting sentiment override strategy in a way that will bankrupt you within 5 years." Each word was calculated to wound, to reduce Thorne's choices to the emotional impulses of an unstable man. It was the same psychological manipulation Eldrick had used throughout his childhood. Question the reasoning, attack the emotions, make capitulation seem like the only rational choice. "You're right about one thing," Thorne said calmly. "I am letting sentiment override strategy. I'm choosing love over profit, authenticity over manipulation, and my children's future over your legacy." "Your alleged children," Eldrick corrected. "You have no proof those babies are yours beyond the word of a woman who has every financial incentive to lie." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Miranda placed a restraining hand on Thorne's arm as his body tensed for violence. "Careful," she murmured. "He's trying to provoke you into doing something that supports his competency claims." Thorne forced himself to breathe, to think, to respond strategically rather than emotionally. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. "DNA test," he said quietly. "If you're so certain they're not mine, you won't object to a paternity test." For the first time since arriving, uncertainty flickered across Eldrick's face. A DNA test would prove Thorne's paternity beyond question, removing that weapon from his arsenal permanently. "That's unnecessary," Eldrick said. "Even if the children are yours, that doesn't change the fundamental reality of your situation, which is that you need me more than I need you." Eldrick's mask of paternal concern dropped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "You think you can walk away from Whitaker Industries and start over? With what capital? What connections? What expertise beyond what I taught you? With enough saved assets to fund my new company, enough industry knowledge to compete effectively, and enough insider information about your business practices to cause serious problems if you continue threatening my family." It was Thorne's turn to lean forward, his steel gray eyes meeting his father's without flinching. "Let me be very clear about something, Dad. I know about the Indonesian shipping contracts that violate international labor laws. I know about the Cayman Islands accounts that haven't been reported to the IRS. I know about the senators you've bribed and the environmental regulations you've circumvented. Eldrick's face went pale beneath his expensive tan. You're bluffing. Miranda, would you mind sharing the documents we prepared? Miranda reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder, placing it on the table between them. Copies of financial records, email correspondences, recorded phone calls, and sworn affidavits from former employees, she said matter-of-factly. Enough evidence to trigger federal investigations into tax evasion, bribery, and environmental crimes. And you'd destroy your own family's reputation. Eldrick's voice was barely controlled. I'd destroy a criminal enterprise masquerading as a legitimate business. Thorne corrected. The Whitaker name will survive. The illegal activities that built our fortune won't. The power dynamic at the table had shifted completely. Eldrick, accustomed to controlling every conversation through intimidation and manipulation, was suddenly the one being threatened. What do you want? He asked finally. I want you to withdraw the injunction against my share transfer. I want you to cease all contact with Ivy and my children. And I want a written agreement that neither you nor anyone acting on your behalf will interfere in our lives again. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow morning copies of everything in that folder go to the FBI, the IRS, the SEC, and every major news outlet in the country. Thorne's voice was steady, final. Your choice. Eldrick stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. The compliant, controllable young man he'd raised had been replaced by someone harder, more determined, completely willing to burn down everything they'd built together. You've changed, he said quietly. I've grown up, Thorne replied. Finally. For a long moment the restaurant seemed to fade around them. Father and son, locked in a battle that had been building for 35 years, each recognizing that this moment would define their relationship forever. There's something else, Eldrick said suddenly. Something you should know before you make this final. Which is, the Carmichael merger isn't just about money, it's about survival. Whitaker Industries is hemorrhaging cash, has been for 2 years. The shipping industry is changing, and we're being undercut by competitors with more efficient operations and better technology. Eldrick's voice carried genuine exhaustion for the first time. The merger with Carmichael isn't about expansion, it's about preventing bankruptcy. The revelation hit Thorne like a physical blow. Everything he'd believed about his father's motivations, about the urgency behind the arranged marriage, suddenly shifted. You're saying the company is failing? I'm saying the company is dying and the Carmichael alliance is the only thing that can save it. Without that merger, within 18 months, Whitaker Industries will cease to exist. Every employee, every pension fund, every family that depends on us, gone. It was masterful manipulation, appealing to Thorne's sense of responsibility for others while making his rebellion seem selfish and destructive. But there was something in his father's voice, a weariness, a vulnerability, that suggested this might actually be true. Show me the books, Thorne said. Real numbers, not the sanitized reports you show the board. Why? Because if what you're saying is true, then there might be another way to save the company. Something that doesn't involve destroying my family or marrying me off like a medieval alliance. Eldrick studied his son's face, searching for deception or weakness. Instead, he saw the same analytical intelligence he'd spent decades cultivating, now turned toward problem-solving rather than compliance. You'd be willing to help? Even after everything? I'd be willing to explore options, Thorne corrected, but with conditions. My relationship with Ivy and the children is off limits. My personal life is no longer subject to your approval, and any solution we develop has to be ethical and legal. Those conditions are acceptable, Eldrick said slowly. Miranda looked between father and son with professional skepticism. This could be another manipulation, she warned quietly. A way to draw you back into his sphere of influence. Maybe, Thorne acknowledged, but if it's true, if the company really is in trouble, then walking away might hurt innocent people. I need to at least understand the situation before I make a final decision. It was the kind of moral complexity that had no easy answers. Thorne's father had lied to him, manipulated him, stolen months of his children's lives, but he might also be telling the truth about thousands of jobs being at stake. 1 week, Thorne said finally. You have 1 week to show me everything. The real financial situation, the actual market pressures, all of it. If I can find a way to save the company without sacrificing my family, I will. If not, the deal with the document stands. Eldrick nodded slowly. 1 week. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Thorne's phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. Babies are both fussy today. Could use help if you're free. The message was simple, practical, but it represented something profound. She was reaching out to him, asking for his help as a father. It was the kind of trust he'd been working to earn for weeks. I have to go, he told his father. My children need me. Of course they do, Eldrick said. And for the first time in Thorne's memory, there was no sarcasm in the words. That's what children do. They need their fathers. As Thorne left the restaurant, he felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Save the company and risk being drawn back into his father's world, or walk away and potentially destroy thousands of livelihoods. But as he thought about Ivy's text about 2 babies who depended on him for comfort and protection, he realized that some choices weren't actually difficult at all. His children came first. Everything else was negotiable. Thorne arrived at Ivy's apartment to find chaos. Both babies were crying simultaneously, the kind of desperate, inconsolable wailing that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. Ivy sat in the middle of her living room floor, still in her pajamas at 3 in the afternoon, tears streaming down her face as she tried to comfort their son while their daughter screamed from her bouncer. I can't do this, Ivy said when she saw him, her voice breaking. I've tried everything, fed them, changed them, burped them, walked them. Nothing works. They've been crying for 4 hours straight, and I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in 3 days. Thorne immediately scooped up their daughter, instinctively falling into the swaying motion that sometimes soothed her. The crying didn't stop, but it shifted to a slightly less frantic pitch. When did this start? He asked, having to raise his voice over the noise. 2 days ago, right after you left for that meeting with your father. Ivy's hair was disheveled, her green eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. The pediatrician says it's normal. Cluster feeding, growth spurts, overstimulation from the hospital stay. But knowing it's normal doesn't make it easier. The apartment looked like a war zone. Burp cloths and baby blankets were scattered across every surface. Dirty bottles crowded the kitchen sink, and the diaper changing station had exploded across the coffee table. It was the visual representation of a new mother completely overwhelmed. Have you eaten today? Thorne asked. I think so. Maybe, I can't remember. That decided it. Thorne shifted his daughter to one arm and reached for his phone with the other. What are you doing? Calling for reinforcements. He dialed a number from memory. Maria? It's Thorne Whitaker. I need you to come to an address in the village. Yes, today. 2 newborns and a mother who needs help. Thank you. Who's Maria? Ivy asked, though she seemed too exhausted to object to whatever help he was summoning. The best baby nurse in Manhattan. She helped raise half the Upper East Side, including me. If anyone can figure out what's wrong with them, it's Maria. Within an hour, Maria Santos arrived like a small, efficient tornado. At 65, she was barely 5 feet tall, but commanded absolute authority when it came to babies. She'd been Thorne's nanny from birth until he started school, and her arrival brought back memories of being safely cared for by someone who genuinely loved children. Mijo, she said to Thorne, using the same endearment she'd called him as a child. Let me see these beautiful babies. She took their son from Ivy's arms with practiced confidence, her weathered hands somehow immediately calming his frantic movements. Within minutes, both babies had quieted to occasional whimpers. They're overstimulated, Maria diagnosed. Too much excitement, too many new people, not enough routine. New babies need quiet, dark, boring environments to feel safe. As if to prove her point, their daughter had fallen asleep against Thorne's chest, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt. But I've been trying to keep them entertained, Ivy protested. Reading to them, playing music, showing them picture books. Save that for when they're older, Maria said kindly. Right now they need sleep, food, clean diapers, and peace. That's all. She moved through the apartment with purposeful efficiency, dimming lights, reducing ambient noise, creating an environment of calm that seemed to settle everyone's nerves. Now, she said to Ivy, when did you last shower? Yesterday? The day before? Go shower, then eat something substantial, then nap for at least 2 hours. I'll handle the babies. But what if they need me? What if they need you healthy and rested more than they need you hovering? Maria said firmly. This is not negotiable. Ivy looked at Thorne as if asking permission, which broke his heart a little. She'd been carrying the entire burden of their care alone, had forgotten that accepting help wasn't a sign of failure. Go, he said gently. I'll stay until you wake up. While Ivy showered, Thorne found himself alone with Maria for the first time in over 20 years. She was preparing bottles with the same methodical precision he remembered from childhood. "She's a good mother," Maria said without looking up. "Exhausted, overwhelmed, but good. She loves those babies more than her own life." "I know. And you? Do you love them more than your own life?" It was a typically direct Maria question, the kind that cut through pretense to the heart of things. "Yes," he said simply. "And their mother? Do you love her more than your own life?" That was more complicated. "I love her more than I've ever loved anyone. But I hurt her badly, Maria. I don't know if love is enough to fix what I broke." "Love is never enough by itself," Maria said, settling into the rocking chair with a bottle. "Love needs action, consistency, time. It needs proving, not just saying." She was right, of course. Over the past month, he'd been focused on grand gestures, confronting his father, threatening to expose criminal activities, offering financial support. But love lived in the small moments, the daily choices, the unglamorous work of building trust one day at a time. "There's something else," Thorne said, "something that might complicate everything." He told her about the meeting with his father, about the revelation that Whitaker Industries was failing, about the impossible choice between saving thousands of jobs and protecting his family from future manipulation. Maria listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your father is a complicated man," she said finally. "I worked for your family for many years, watched him build that company from nothing. He sacrificed everything for success, his health, his relationships, his ability to love freely. He made you into what he thought you needed to be to survive in his world. Are you defending him?" "I'm explaining him." "There's a difference." Maria adjusted the baby in her arms. "But explanation isn't excuse. He stole months of your children's lives from you, caused their mother tremendous pain. That can't be forgiven just because the company is in trouble. But what about the employees, the families who depend on those jobs? What about the family that depends on you?" Maria gestured toward the bedroom where Ivy was sleeping. "You think you can save everyone, but some people don't want to be saved. Some companies deserve to fail if they're built on lies and manipulation." It was a harsh truth, but one Thorne needed to hear. His instinct to fix everything, to bear responsibility for outcomes beyond his control, was the same pattern that had made him vulnerable to his father's manipulation in the first place. "What would you do?" he asked. "I would ask myself one question. What serves these babies best? Not your father, not the company, not even your own guilt. What gives these children the best chance at a happy, healthy life with parents who love them?" Before Thorne could answer, they heard movement from the bedroom. Ivy emerged, looking more human. Clean hair, fresh clothes, the desperate edge of exhaustion slightly dulled. "How long was I asleep?" she asked. 3 hours, Maria said with satisfaction. "The baby slept the entire time." 3 hours? Ivy looked amazed. "They haven't slept for more than 45 minutes straight since we got home." "They were feeding off your anxiety," Maria explained. "Babies are like emotional sponges. They absorb whatever energy the adults around them are projecting. When you're calm, they're calm." It was a lesson that extended beyond infant care. The stress and uncertainty surrounding Thorne's family situation had been affecting everyone, creating a cycle of tension that kept everyone on edge. "I should go," Thorne said reluctantly. "Let you rest while they're settled." "Actually," Ivy said, surprising him, "could you stay for dinner? I was thinking of ordering pizza, and it would be nice to have adult conversation that doesn't revolve around feeding schedules." The invitation was casual, but Thorne heard the olive branch in it. After weeks of careful boundaries and formal co-parenting arrangements, she was asking him to simply be present, to share a meal like the family they were still figuring out how to become. "I'd like that," he said. Maria beamed at both of them. "I'll stay until the babies wake up, then you two can practice the new routine I'm going to teach you." As they sat around Ivy's small dining table eating pizza and talking about everything except the complicated realities of their situation, Thorne felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the hollow emptiness he'd been mistaking for calm, but actual contentment born from being exactly where he belonged. "There's something I need to tell you," Ivy said as they were cleaning up. "About the apartment, about our living situation." Thorne's contentment wavered. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about finding a place that works for the babies but lets me maintain my independence. And I realized I've been thinking about it wrong." "How so?" "I've been so focused on proving I can do everything alone that I haven't been considering what's actually best for them. She gestured toward the bassinet where their children slept peacefully. They need consistency, routine, calm environments. They need both their parents, not one exhausted mother trying to be everything to everyone. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we should look at places together, not as a couple getting back together, but as co-parents who want to make this work. Separate bedrooms, shared common areas, joint responsibility for night feedings and diaper changes. The suggestion was practical, logical, and terrifying. Living together would mean constant proximity, shared domestic responsibilities, and the daily temptation to slip back into old patterns before they'd truly addressed what had broken between them. Are you sure? He asked. No, Ivy admitted. But I'm sure that what we've been doing isn't sustainable. And I'm sure that our children deserve better than parents who are too proud to work together. It was perhaps the most mature thing either of them had said since the divorce. Thorne felt the weight of the decision, not just the practical logistics but the emotional risk of building something new while the foundation of their relationship was still being repaired. There's something else, he said. About my father, about the company situation. I need to make a decision this week that could affect our future, and I want you to know what we might be dealing with. He told her everything. The failing company, the thousands of jobs at stake, the moral complexity of walking away from something that could be saved. Ivy listened without interruption, her green eyes serious and thoughtful. What does your gut tell you? She asked when he finished. That my father is manipulating me again, using other people's livelihoods as leverage to keep me under his control. And what does your heart tell you? That some things are more important than money or legacy or even doing the right thing for strangers. He looked at their sleeping children. That my first responsibility is to the family I'm trying to build, not the company I'm trying to escape. Ivy nodded slowly. Then you have your answer. It's not that simple. If I walk away and the company fails, then it fails because your father built it on lies and illegal practices, not because you chose your children over his ambitions. Her voice was firm, certain. You can't save everyone, Thorne, but you can save us. The words settled something deep in his chest. Maria had been right. The only question that mattered was what served his children best. Everything else was noise. So, we'll look for a place together? He asked. We'll look for a place together, Ivy confirmed, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. As Thorne prepared to leave that evening, Maria pulled him aside in the hallway. You're making the right choice, mijo, she said quietly, both about the company and about the living situation. But remember, healing takes time. Don't rush the process. What if I mess it up again? Then you'll fix it again. That's what families do. They break and heal until the healing sticks. She patted his cheek with a weathered hand. You're not your father, Thorne. You're capable of loving without controlling, of being strong without being cruel. Trust that. Walking home through the village streets, Thorne felt the weight of his decision settling into something like resolution. Tomorrow he would call his father and withdraw from any involvement with Whitaker Industries. He would let the company succeed or fail on its own merits without sacrificing his family's peace for other people's problems. Some bridges were meant to be burned. Some legacies were worth abandoning. His phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. Thank you for today. The babies are still sleeping. You're a good father. It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of absolution. Whatever mistakes he'd made in the past, whatever challenges lay ahead, he was building something new now. Something real. Something worth fighting for. The brownstone they found in Brooklyn Heights was perfect. A 3-bedroom duplex with hardwood floors, tall windows, and enough space for 2 adults to maintain separate lives while raising children together. Ivy stood in the master bedroom while Thorne examined the smaller bedroom that would be his, both carefully maintaining the physical and emotional distance their arrangement required. The lease says no pets, no smoking, and no overnight guests without prior approval from both tenants, the landlord, Mrs. Patterson, explained as she handed over the keys. She was a woman in her 70s who'd raised 5 children in this same building and understood the complexities of modern family arrangements. Both tenants? Ivy asked. The lease is in both your names, Mrs. Patterson clarified. Equal responsibility, equal say in household decisions. That's the only way this kind of arrangement works long term. It had taken 3 weeks to find the right place. 3 weeks of careful negotiations about everything from bedroom assignments to kitchen responsibilities. They'd looked at over a dozen apartments, each viewing a test of their ability to make decisions together without falling back into the patterns of their marriage. Now standing in their new home with boxes scattered around them, and the babies napping in their travel cribs, the reality of what they'd committed to felt both thrilling, and terrifying. "I should warn you," Mrs. Patterson continued, "that young man in the expensive suit has been parked across the street for the past hour, watching the building. He looks like trouble." Thorne's blood ran cold. Through the window he could see a black sedan with tinted windows, the same type his father used for corporate surveillance. "Ivy, take the babies to the back bedroom," he said quietly. "What's happening?" "My father's making his final move." The doorbell rang before either of them could react further. Mrs. Patterson, oblivious to the tension, headed downstairs to answer it. Within minutes they could hear voices in the hallway, one belonging to their landlord, the other carrying the smooth authority Thorne knew all too well. "Mr. Whitaker is here to see his son," came Eldrick's voice through the thin walls. "I'll tell him you're here," Mrs. Patterson replied diplomatically, but Eldrick had never been one to wait for permission. His footsteps on the stairs announced his arrival before he appeared in their doorway, impeccably dressed as always, but with something wild in his eyes that Thorne had never seen before. "Quite a step down from your penthouse," Eldrick observed, taking in the modest apartment with obvious disdain, "though I suppose it's appropriate for your reduced circumstances." "What do you want?" Thorne asked, positioning himself between his father and the bedroom where Ivy had retreated with the children. "I want to show you something." Eldrick produced a tablet from his briefcase, swiping to a news article with the headline, "Whitaker Industries Announces Massive Layoffs." Thorne's stomach dropped as he read the article. 800 employees terminated effective immediately. 3 regional offices closing. Stock prices plummeting. The Carmichael merger officially dead. "You did this," Eldrick said, his voice carrying a satisfaction that was deeply unsettling. "Your refusal to honor your commitments. Your emotional breakdown over a woman and some babies. This is the result. You're the one who chose to announce layoffs instead of restructuring," Thorne countered, though the guilt was already eating at him. "You're the one who let the company fail rather than adapt to changing markets. I'm the one who tried to save it through strategic alliance, while you chose to play house with your ex-wife." Eldrick stepped closer, and Thorne could smell expensive cologne mixed with something sharper. Desperation, maybe, or the beginning of genuine breakdown. "But this isn't over. It's not too late to fix this." From the bedroom came the sound of a baby crying, one of the twins waking from their nap. The sound seemed to trigger something in Eldrick, a flicker of humanity that was quickly suppressed. "New proposal," he continued. "You return to the company, marry Celeste as planned, and I'll reinstate every single employee who was laid off today. Full benefits, back pay, the works. And if I refuse, then 800 families lose their livelihoods permanently. The company goes under completely, and I make sure that everyone knows it was your selfishness that destroyed their lives." It was masterful manipulation, using Thorne's sense of responsibility as a weapon, making him choose between his family's happiness and the survival of hundreds of strangers who depended on paychecks they'd never receive. "You're insane," Ivy said from the bedroom doorway, their son in her arms. She'd heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "You're holding innocent people hostage to force your son into a marriage he doesn't want." "I'm saving a company and preserving a legacy," Eldrick replied coolly. "Sometimes that requires difficult choices." "The only difficult choice here," Ivy said, stepping into the main room with remarkable courage, "is whether to call the police or a psychiatric facility." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Eldrick's composure finally cracked completely, revealing the desperate, controlling man underneath the polished exterior. "You," he said, pointing at Ivy with shaking finger, "have destroyed everything. My son had a future, a real future, before you trapped him with pregnancy and manipulated him with sentiment." "I trapped him," Ivy's voice rose. "I sent him a letter telling him about the pregnancy, which you intercepted and responded to with rejection. I raised his children alone for 7 months while believing he'd abandoned us." "Where exactly is the manipulation in that?" "The manipulation is in existing," Eldrick snarled, "in being the kind of woman who makes successful men forget their responsibilities." The naked hatred in his voice was shocking. This wasn't about business or legacy. This was about a man who'd never learned to love, watching his son choose love over everything he'd been taught to value. "Get out," Thorne said quietly. "I'm not finished. Get out!" The explosion of rage surprised everyone, including Thorne himself. "Get out of our home. Get out of our lives, and take your threats and manipulation with you. You're making a mistake that will destroy hundreds of lives," Eldrick warned. "You're the one who chose to make this personal instead of finding actual solutions," Thorne replied. "You're the one who would rather see the company burn than let it succeed without your control." For a moment, father and son stared at each other across an unbridgeable chasm. 35 years of relationship, complicated, damaged, but still a relationship, ending in this shabby apartment with nothing left but mutual destruction. "Don't come back," Thorne said finally. "Don't call. Don't send flowers. Don't drive by our building. If I see you near my family again, I'll file restraining orders and release those documents to every news outlet in the country." Eldrick gathered what remained of his dignity, straightening his tie and smoothing his hair with hands that trembled slightly. "You'll regret this," he said. "When you're struggling to pay rent on this hovel, when those babies need medical care you can't afford, when she gets tired of playing house with a man who gave up everything for a fantasy, you'll come crawling back." "Maybe," Thorne admitted. "But I'd rather struggle with people who love me than succeed with people who see me as a commodity." After Eldrick left, the apartment felt like the aftermath of a tornado. Ivy sat heavily in the rocking chair they'd placed by the window, their son still in her arms while their daughter began crying from the bedroom. 800 people, Thorne said, slumping against the wall. 800 families who needed those jobs. 800 people your father chose to fire rather than find ethical solutions, Ivy corrected. "This isn't your fault, Thorne. This is what manipulation looks like when it doesn't get its way. But what if he's right? What if I could have saved their jobs by going back? At what cost?" Ivy stood, moving to comfort their crying daughter. "Your sanity? Our children's chance at having a father who actually loves them? My ability to trust that you'll choose us when things get difficult?" She was right, but the guilt was overwhelming. Every rational part of Thorne's mind knew that his father's failures weren't his responsibility, but the emotional programming of 3 decades was harder to overcome. "There's something else," Ivy said quietly. "Something I need to tell you." Thorne looked up, dreading whatever new crisis was about to unfold. "I got a job offer yesterday. Marketing director for a sustainable fashion company in Manhattan. Good salary, flexible hours, the kind of work I actually care about." That's great," Thorne said, though he wasn't sure why she seemed hesitant about good news. "The thing is, they want me to start next month, which means childcare, commuting, less time with the babies during a critical development period." "We'll figure it out," Thorne said immediately. "Nannies, daycare, whatever you need. Or," Ivy said carefully, "you could be their primary caregiver during the day. You're not working right now, you're amazing with them, and it would give you time to plan your new company without the pressure of immediate income." The suggestion was practical, but represented a complete reversal of traditional gender roles, something that would have been unthinkable in his father's world but felt perfectly natural in the life they were building together. "Are you asking me to be a stay-at-home dad?" "I'm asking if you want to be the parent who's home during the day while I'm the one who commutes to an office." Ivy's smile was tentative but genuine. "We don't have to follow anyone else's script, Thorne. We can build whatever kind of family works for us." The idea of spending his days with their children, of being present for every milestone his father's manipulation had already stolen from him, felt like a gift he didn't deserve. "What about your independence? Your need to prove you can succeed on your own?" "I proved that during the 7 months I raised them alone," Ivy said simply. "Now I want to prove that we can succeed together, as partners who support each other's dreams instead of competing with them." It was perhaps the most radical proposition either of them had ever considered, building a life based on what they actually wanted, rather than what society expected or what their families demanded. "There's one condition," Thorne said, "which is, we do this as equals. Shared financial responsibilities, shared domestic duties, shared decision-making about everything that affects our family." "And shared bedrooms?" Ivy asked, her voice carefully neutral. The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. They'd been carefully maintaining physical and emotional distance for months, building trust through co-parenting without addressing the deeper questions about their relationship. "I don't know," Thorne admitted. "I know I love you. I know I want to build a life with you. But I also know that rushing back into romance before we've really healed might damage everything we're trying to build. So we take it slow," Ivy said. "Day by day, choice by choice, until we know for sure that we're choosing each other for the right reasons. And if we decide we're better as co-parents than as a couple, then we'll still have given our children the gift of parents who respect each other and work together." Ivy's voice carried a certainty that had been missing for months. "Either way, we win." As evening fell over their new home, they worked together to unpack boxes and settle the babies into their new environment. It was domestic, mundane, and absolutely perfect. The kind of ordinary evening Thorne had never imagined wanting, but now couldn't imagine living without. His phone rang as they were putting the children down for the night. Miranda Chen's name appeared on the screen. "The restraining order has been filed," she said without preamble. "Your father can't legally contact you or come within 100 yards of your residence. Also, the FBI is very interested in those documents we discussed. There's going to be a formal investigation." Thorne felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The bridge to his old life was officially burned, but bridges could be rebuilt if both sides were willing to do the work. Any word on the company layoffs? Actually, yes. Apparently several employees are banding together to form a cooperative, trying to buy out certain divisions and run them as worker-owned enterprises. They're looking for investors who believe in ethical business practices. It was an unexpected development. Hope emerging from the ashes of his father's scorched earth tactics. "Send me their information," Thorne said. "I might be able to help." After hanging up, he found Ivy in the kitchen making tea, the evening light filtering through windows that looked out over the Brooklyn Bridge. She'd changed into comfortable clothes and tied her auburn hair back in a messy bun, looking more beautiful than any society heiress ever could. "Good news?" she asked. "The beginning of good news," he corrected. "It'll take time to rebuild everything that was destroyed, but at least now we have the chance to build it right." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle across the river. Two people who'd lost everything and found something better in the wreckage. "Thorne," Ivy said softly. "Yeah? Thank you. For choosing us. For choosing love over legacy. Authenticity over approval. For becoming the man I always knew you could be. Thank you for giving me the chance to become that man," he replied. "For seeing the person I could be even when I couldn't see it myself." As they prepared for their first night in their new home, separate bedrooms but shared dreams, Thorne felt something he'd never experienced before. Complete certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The storm was finally over. Now came the much harder and more beautiful work of building a life worth living. 6 months later, their Brooklyn Heights apartment had transformed into something neither Thorne nor Ivy had imagined possible, a real home. The morning sun streamed through windows adorned with Ivy's plants, highlighting toys scattered across hardwood floors and the organized chaos of a house where children were truly loved. Thorne sat in the kitchen feeding their daughter her morning bottle while their son practiced rolling over on a blanket nearby. Ivy had left for work an hour earlier, kissing both babies goodbye and leaving Thorne with a quick peck on the cheek that had become their morning routine. Intimate but careful, affectionate but not quite romantic. He'd fallen into the rhythm of full-time fatherhood with surprising ease. His days were filled with feedings and naps, doctor's appointments, and play dates with other parents in the neighborhood. His evenings were spent planning Meridian Logistics, the sustainable shipping company he was building from the ground up, funded by his own savings and a growing network of ethically minded investors. The doorbell rang, and Thorne's blood chilled. Even after 6 months of peace, unexpected visitors still triggered his fight-or-flight response. Through the window, he could see Miranda Chen on the doorstep, her expression grim in a way that meant serious news. "The investigation is over," she said without preamble once he'd let her in. "Your father has been indicted on 14 federal charges: tax evasion, bribery, environmental violations, fraud. He's looking at 20 to 30 years in prison." Thorne felt the complex mix of emotions he'd been expecting: relief, sadness, vindication, and something that might have been grief for the father he'd never really had. "There's more," Miranda continued. "Whitaker Industries has been completely dissolved. Assets are being liquidated to pay fines and settle lawsuits. But there's something else, something unexpected." She handed him a manila envelope, thick and official looking. 3 days ago, your father signed over his entire personal fortune to a trust fund for your children. Everything. The penthouse, the art collection, investment portfolios, offshore accounts. All of it. Thorne stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. Why would he do that? "The letter he included might explain," Miranda said, producing a cream-colored envelope with "For Thorne" written in Eldrick's distinctive handwriting. With trembling hands, Thorne opened the letter. His father's words, written in the precise script that had intimidated him since childhood, seemed to echo from the page. "Son, by the time you read this, I will be in federal custody, paying the price for choices I made long before you were born. I have spent my entire life believing that love was weakness, that emotion was the enemy of success, that control was the only path to security. I was wrong about everything. Watching you choose your family over my empire. Watching you build something authentic while I destroyed everything I'd spent decades creating. It forced me to see what I had become. Not a successful businessman, but a man so afraid of vulnerability that I poisoned every relationship I touched. I stole 7 months of your children's lives from you. I cannot give those months back, but I can give them something else. The freedom to grow up without the burden of my mistakes. The money comes with one condition. Use it to build the kind of company, the kind of legacy, the kind of life that makes the world better instead of just making you richer. Be the father I never learned how to be. I am proud of the man you became despite me, not because of me. Your father, Eldrick Thorne, read the letter 3 times before the words truly sank in. This wasn't manipulation or a final attempt at control. This was accountability, acknowledgement, and perhaps the closest thing to an apology his father was capable of giving. How much money are we talking about? He asked finally. Approximately $400 million, Miranda said quietly. Enough to fund your new company, secure your children's futures, and probably change a few thousand other lives in the process. The amount was staggering, life-changing, overwhelming. But more important than the money was what it represented. His father finally, truly letting go. There's something else, Miranda continued. Celeste Carmichael has been trying to reach you. Apparently she has information about your father's final months that she thinks you should know. Before Thorne could respond, his phone rang. Ivy's name appeared on the screen and he answered immediately. I'm coming home early, she said without preamble. There's something important we need to discuss. Something about us. The tone in her voice, serious but not panicked, sent his heart racing. Is everything okay? Everything is complicated. I'll be there in an hour. The line went dead, leaving Thorne staring at his phone with a mixture of hope and terror. Miranda gathered her papers. I'll leave you to process all this. But Thorne, whatever Ivy wants to discuss, whatever decision you're facing, remember that money doesn't define you anymore. Your choices do. After she left, Thorne sat on the floor with his children, his father's letter in one hand and his son's tiny fist wrapped around his finger. $400 million. Enough to ensure his children never wanted for anything. Enough to build a company that could revolutionize an entire industry. Enough to change countless lives. But all he could think about was the conversation he was about to have with Ivy. She arrived home exactly 1 hour later, her cheeks flushed from the cool October air, her eyes bright with something that looked like nervous excitement. She kissed the babies, hung up her coat, and sat across from him at their small dining table with the careful deliberation of someone about to change everything. I got a promotion, she said, Senior Vice President of Global Marketing. It's a huge opportunity. More money than I ever imagined making, a chance to build something incredible. That's amazing, Thorne said, though he could hear the but coming. But it would mean traveling internationally, long hours, significant time away from home, the kind of career that would make it impossible to be the kind of mother I want to be. She paused, looking down at her hands clasped on the table. So I turned it down. Thorne's heart stopped. Ivy, you can't give up your career for— I'm not giving up my career, she interrupted. I'm starting my own company. Sustainable marketing consulting, working with businesses that want to make a positive impact. I've already got 3 clients lined up, and I can do most of the work from home. That's incredible. But why do you look terrified? Ivy took a deep breath, and when she looked up at him, her green eyes held the same vulnerability he'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. Because starting my own company means I need a business partner. Someone I trust completely. Someone who shares my values. Someone who's proven they can build something from nothing. She paused. Someone who's also the father of my children, and the man I'm still in love with. The words hung between them, like a bridge spanning the careful distance they'd maintained for 6 months. Thorne felt his world tilt on its axis. Are you asking me to be your business partner, or are you asking me to be more than that? I'm asking if you're ready to stop pretending that co-parenting is enough, Ivy said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm asking if you want to build a real partnership, in business, in parenting, in life. I'm asking if you're ready to love me the way you love our children, completely, without reservation, without holding pieces of yourself back. The question he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure was finally on the table. 6 months of careful boundaries, of rebuilding trust one day at a time, of proving they could work together without falling back into old patterns. All of it had led to this moment. There's something I need to tell you first, Thorne said, and explained about his father's letter. The trust fund. The investigation's conclusion. Ivy listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something that looked like relief. "So we're not just talking about a small consulting firm," she said when he finished. "We're talking about building something that could change industries. We're talking about having the resources to do whatever we want, to build whatever kind of life we can imagine." "And what do you want?" Ivy asked. "What kind of life do you imagine?" Thorne looked around their apartment at the toys scattered across the floor, at photos of their children covering the refrigerator, at the woman who'd given him everything that truly mattered. The answer was so simple it took his breath away. "I want this," he said. "I want morning feedings and late-night diaper changes and arguments about whose turn it is to do laundry. I want to build a business with you that matters, that makes the world better. I want to marry you again. The right way this time, because we choose each other every day instead of because it's expected or convenient. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to teach our children that love isn't weakness, that vulnerability is strength, that the most successful thing you can do is build a life that makes you genuinely happy." Ivy's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Is that a proposal?" she asked. "It's a promise," Thorne said, reaching across the table to take her hands. "A promise that if you'll have me, really have me, all of me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." "The rest of your life is a long time," Ivy said softly. "Not nearly long enough," he replied. When she kissed him, it was different from the careful pecks on the cheek they'd shared for months. This was the kiss of two people who'd found their way back to each other through loss and healing, who'd learned that real love wasn't about possession or control, but about choosing each other freely, every single day. From the living room came the sound of their daughter babbling to herself, and their son's delighted giggle as he successfully rolled from back to stomach, the sounds of a family that had survived everything and emerged stronger. "So," Ivy said when they finally broke apart, "partners?" "Partners," Thorne agreed. "In everything." Outside their window, the Brooklyn Bridge stretched across the river toward Manhattan, connecting two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. Inside their home, two people who'd lost each other and found their way back were planning a future that would honor both their past and their dreams. It wasn't the fairy tale ending either of them had imagined. It was better. It was real, earned through pain and choice and the daily work of building something worth keeping. Their children would grow up knowing that love wasn't easy, but it was always worth fighting for, that families could break and heal and become stronger in the broken places, that the best legacies weren't built from money or power, but from the courage to choose love over fear, authenticity over approval, and each other over everything else. The rest was just the beginning. 5 years later, the late afternoon sun cast golden light across the sprawling backyard of their Westchester home, where 5-year-old twins, Charlotte and James Whitaker, were engaged in an elaborate game involving superhero capes, a sandbox, and what appeared to be a rescue mission for their stuffed animals. Ivy watched from the kitchen window as she prepared dinner, her hands moving automatically through familiar motions, while her mind processed the day's meetings. Meridian Consulting had grown from a 2-person operation in their Brooklyn apartment to a company with 43 employees and offices in New York, San Francisco, and London. The sustainable business revolution they'd helped spark was changing industries across the globe. "Mommy!" Charlotte put sand in Mr. Bear's mouth, and now he can't breathe, James announced, bursting through the back door with the urgency only a 5-year-old could bring to a stuffed animal emergency. "Then we better help him," Ivy said, setting down her knife and following her son outside. Charlotte stood in the sandbox wearing a bright red cape and a determined expression that reminded Ivy so much of Thorne, it took her breath away. She'd inherited his steel-gray eyes and stubborn chin, along with his ability to turn any situation into a complex strategic problem. "I wasn't putting sand in his mouth," Charlotte explained with the patience of someone who'd clearly thought this through. "I was teaching him to breathe underwater so he could rescue the fish from the polluted ocean, like Daddy's boats do." At 5 years old, Charlotte had somehow grasped the essence of what Meridian Logistics represented, the company Thorne had built from the ruins of his father's empire. Clean shipping, sustainable practices, and a commitment to leaving the world better than they'd found it. "That's very thoughtful," Ivy said, kneeling in the sand beside her daughter. "But maybe Mr. Bear would prefer a different kind of training?" "Like what?" "Like learning to use the special equipment Daddy's engineers designed, the kind that helps clean the water instead of teaching bears to breathe sand." Charlotte considered this seriously, then nodded. Can we build a cleaning machine for the sandbox? I think that's a project for after dinner, came Thorne's voice from the deck. Ivy looked up to see her husband emerging from his home office, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, and the slightly dazed expression of someone who'd spent the afternoon in video conferences with 3 different time zones. At 40, Thorne had grown into his role as CEO of Meridian Logistics with a confidence that came from building something authentic rather than inheriting something expected. How did the Tokyo meeting go? Ivy asked as he joined them in the sandbox. They want to partner with us on the new hydrogen fuel initiative. Apparently, our reputation for keeping promises has reached the Pacific Rim. Thorne lifted James onto his shoulders while Charlotte immediately began explaining her underwater rescue training program. And the call with Dad's lawyers. The foundation approved funding for the employee cooperative's expansion. They're buying 3 more ships and creating another 100 jobs. Thorne's voice carried the satisfaction of watching something grow from seeds planted in crisis. The Eldrick Whitaker Foundation for Ethical Business, established with the $400 million his father had left in trust, had become one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the country. Under Thorne and Ivy's joint leadership, it funded everything from worker cooperatives to clean energy research to educational programs that taught sustainable business practices. Eldrick himself was serving his sentence at a minimum security federal facility in Connecticut. He'd been a model prisoner, spending his time teaching business courses to other inmates and writing letters to his grandchildren that Thorne and Ivy carefully reviewed before sharing. The man who'd once destroyed lives through manipulation was now trying to rebuild them through education and accountability. "Uncle Marcus is here," Charlotte announced, spotting the familiar figure of Marcus Webb climbing out of his car in the driveway. Marcus had been Thorne's college roommate and was now CFO of Meridian Logistics, one of the few people from Thorne's old life who'd supported his decision to start over. He was also James's godfather and Charlotte's self-appointed favorite adult after her parents. "Sorry I'm late," Marcus called, jogging across the yard with a gift bag in his hands. Traffic from the city was brutal. "You're just in time for the Sandbox Engineering Symposium," Ivy said, gesturing toward Charlotte's elaborate construction project. "Excellent. I brought supplies." Marcus produced 2 small hard hats from his bag, along with what appeared to be child-sized blueprints. "I thought we might design an actual water filtration system, for educational purposes." This was why their children adored him. Marcus took their ideas seriously and had the engineering background to help them build functional versions of their imaginative solutions. "Before we start construction," Ivy said, "how about we eat?" Maria made her famous lasagna. Maria Santos had officially retired from full-time nanny work, but still came to their house twice a week, ostensibly to help with the children, but really because she'd become part of their family. At 70, she was slowing down but showed no signs of losing her ability to manage chaos with gentle authority. As they gathered around the dining room table, a warm, scarred piece of oak that bore the marks of homework sessions and art projects, Ivy felt the familiar sense of gratitude that had become her default emotional state. This life they'd built wasn't perfect. They still had arguments about money and schedules and whose turn it was to handle bedtime stories. But it was real, chosen, and entirely their own. "Mommy," James said around a mouthful of lasagna, "when are you and Daddy going to have another baby?" The question, delivered with the casual curiosity of a 5-year-old, made both parents freeze. They'd been discussing it privately for months. The logistics, the timing, the question of whether their hearts and their house had room for more chaos and love. "Why do you ask?" Ivy said carefully. "Because Sarah at school has 3 babies at her house and she says 3 is better than 2, because then nobody gets left out." "That's interesting math," Thorne said, catching Ivy's eye across the table. "What do you think, Charlotte? Do you want more siblings?" Charlotte considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "Only if we can teach them about clean water and superhero rescue missions. I think any new siblings would be very lucky to learn from you 2, Ivy said diplomatically. Later that evening, after Marcus had helped design and build a surprisingly functional water filtration system in the sandbox, after the children had been bathed and read to and tucked into beds with their rescued stuffed animals, Thorne and Ivy sat on their deck watching stars appear over Westchester County. "So," Thorne said, reaching for her hand, "3 babies. Sarah's logic is pretty compelling," Ivy agreed. "Nobody gets left out." "Are we seriously considering this?" "I've been seriously considering it for months," Ivy admitted. Every time I watch you with them, every time I see how naturally you've grown into being their father, I find myself thinking about how lucky another child would be to have you as their dad, even though it would mean maternity leave during the London office opening, even though we'd have to completely reorganize the travel schedule and probably hire more help, even though all of that. Ivy turned to face him fully. We built this life to support what matters most to us. If what matters most expands, we'll figure out how to support that too. It was the same philosophy that had guided every major decision they'd made over the past 5 years. Lead with love, solve the logistics later. Trust that people who choose each other daily can figure out how to make anything work. There's something else, Thorne said. Something I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. Ivy's heart skipped. Good something or bad something? Complicated something? Thorne pulled an envelope from his pocket. This came yesterday, from my father. Eldrick's letters arrived every few months, usually containing updates on his rehabilitation programs and carefully worded requests to maintain contact with his grandchildren. Thorne and Ivy had established boundaries, supervised video calls twice a year, birthday cards approved by them before being shared, no promises about future relationships until Eldrick proved sustained change over years rather than months. What does it say? He's being released early for good behavior. 6 months from now, he'll be free. The news hit Ivy like a physical impact. After 5 years of carefully managed distance, the idea of Eldrick back in the world, potentially seeking a more active role in their lives, was terrifying and complicated. How do you feel about that? She asked. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me hopes that the man who wrote those letters, who spent 5 years in therapy and teaching other people how to rebuild their lives, maybe that man could actually be a grandfather our children deserve to know. And the other part remembers that he stole 7 months of our children's lives and nearly destroyed everything we built. That trust, once broken that completely, might never be fully repairable. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the complexity of forgiveness when children's well-being was involved. We'll figure it out, Ivy said finally. When the time comes, we'll make decisions based on what's best for Charlotte and James, not what's easiest for us or what might heal old wounds. Together, always together. As if summoned by their conversation about family expansion, a sound from the baby monitor caught their attention, Charlotte's voice drifting through the speaker. James, are you awake? Yeah, I can't sleep. Do you think Mommy and Daddy are happy? I think so. They smile a lot, and they hug each other when they think we're not looking. Good. I want them to be happy like Grandpa Marcus and Uncle Marcus are happy with their work. And I want them to have another baby so we can teach it about saving fish. Me too. But maybe we should ask for a sister this time. Boys are loud. You're loud, James. That's different. I'm loud with important things to say. Ivy and Thorne looked at each other and burst into quiet laughter. 5 years of parenting had taught them that children processed the world's complexities with a clarity adults often lost in overthinking. I think our decision just got made for us, Thorne said, by a 5-year-old who wants to teach baby siblings about environmental conservation, by 2 5-year-olds who've grown up watching their parents choose love over fear, who think expanding our family is a natural extension of the happiness they see every day. Ivy leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of the man who'd rebuilt himself from the ground up to become worthy of the love she'd never stopped offering. One more question, she said. Boy or girl? Yes, Thorne said immediately. That's not how biology works. That's not how our family works either, he pointed out. We don't do anything the conventional way. Why start now? Fair point. Ivy tilted her face up to kiss him, tasting 5 years of daily choices, of arguments resolved and trust rebuilt, of love that had been tested by everything life could throw at it, and emerged stronger. So, we're really doing this? We're really doing this. All of it? The baby? The expanded business? Dealing with your father's release? Teaching 3 children how to save the world? All of it, Thorne confirmed. Because 5 years ago you taught me that the scariest decisions are usually the ones most worth making. As they went inside to begin planning for a future that would be even more chaotic and beautiful than the present they'd built, neither of them noticed the small faces pressed against the upstairs window. 2 children who'd learned that love wasn't something that happened to you but something you chose, every day, in ways both grand and small. In the morning, Charlotte would present them with detailed plans for converting the guest room into a nursery that could also function as a water conservation education center. James would offer to give up his favorite stuffed bear, so the new baby would have something to love immediately. And Ivy and Thorne would realize once again, that the greatest success either of them had ever achieved was learning how to build a family that made everyone in it braver, kinder, and more authentically themselves. The broken places had become the strongest parts. The ending had become the beginning, and love, as it turned out, was always worth the risk. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choice to forgive and expand the family despite past betrayals? What do you think the future holds for Charlotte and James as they grow up in a family built on authentic love rather than obligation? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.